This fall, we've been focusing on a crucial election underway for the local station board at progressive radio station WBAI. Tonight, we'll be looking at two candidates for the local station board, Father Lawrence Lucas and T.B. Brooks. They are running with the Justice and Unity campaign, a multiracial, majority women slate, working to maintain the station's activist, anti-racist focus. Then we'll examine the business history of multimillionaire and board re-election candidate Steve Brown, leader of ACE, or the Alliance for Community Elections, a mostly white group which is highly critical of the station's current mix of programming. Finally, we'll hear more about Justice and Unity's proposal to bring more radio channels for the station to air. Candidates from the Justice and Unity campaign are troubled by a 3-year-long negative email campaign during which board member Steve Brown sent more than 60 messages with many distortions about the station. He has frequently sent messages to a list in his possession containing thousands of WBAI listeners.
Brown's harsh emails have been repudiated by the local station board, which passed a motion of disassociation last March because of the racially inflammatory content, unsubstantiated allegations, defamatory calls for firing of program director Bernard White, and even outrageous statements such as what the board termed a call for violence against Bernard White. Quote, "You should have been at her side, whacking Bernard with a baseball bat," close quote, and a statement that Mr. White's actions are worse for WBAI than those of, quote, "Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush combined," close quote. In 2000 and 2001, when WBAI was taken over by pro-corporate forces from the Pacifica National Office, Brown was involved in the movement to reclaim the station, which formed in a broad umbrella group called Concerned Friends of WBAI. But Brown was a member of a small group within that larger movement that some say acted in a factional way, passing around their own separate sign-up lists at large movement meetings, creating confusion among listeners present, and then refusing to share those lists with the larger movement. This effort amassed the names and email addresses of thousands of the most ardent WBAI supporters. Ray LaForest talks about the likely source of Brown's email list.
Well, from the very beginning, on hindsight, even before we got the station back, it became clear that Steve Brown and his allies were obsessed with taking over the control of the station. So while the rest of us were still fighting to wrestle the system from the cool people, they were going around at every meeting and collecting signatures, sometimes under false pretense. I was witness personally to a meeting in Lower Manhattan where when finally took the station over, where documents were given to people to sign, letting people believe that that information was being given to WBAI, and when it was only going to be for this group.
The WBAI local station board, on which Brown sits, passed a resolution against his constant email attacks. WBAI program director Bernard White speaks to what he believes is the impact of Steve Brown's emails on the station's fundraising.
These emails that go all over the country and to our listenership do just that. They don't close WBAI down, but it does begin to eat into our ability to sustain ourselves.
Candidate T.B. Brooks, a member of the Justice and Unity campaign seeking election to the local station board, discusses the impact of Brown's conduct.
And I think this has had a very destructive kind of effect on people feeling close to the station. I mean, yeah, they tune in for the information, but you mentioned BAI and they have images that have been evoked by Steve Brown's emails asking people to whack Bernard White with a baseball bat while he talks to somebody else. And there are all kinds of really disgusting images that Steve Brown evokes that makes people feel they don't want to hang out at the studio.
Many people receiving Brown's email ask, who is Steve Brown? We'll try to answer part of that question in today's program.
This past February, the New York Times ran an article about the Chateau d'Étampes, an 18th century French mansion that was disassembled in France and reassembled in Long Island in 1927. The article went on to report that its current owner, the very same Steve Brown, had recently put the home up for sale and was asking $7 million.
Brown's official candidate statement says, quote, for 25 years, I owned and ran one of America's largest and most successful marketing firms, whose annual revenues exceeded $300 million, close quote. Earlier, Brown had acknowledged his company was Direct Marketing Enterprises, or DME. In 1988, a New York Times article discussed DME. Quote, its owners, Stephen Brown and Jerry S. Williams, each received a salary of $500,000 and had dividends of up to $13 million, according to public documents filed in 1986, close quote. The article, titled Consumer World, Mail Order House of 100 Names, went on to say, quote, Raffler, also known as Direct Marketing Enterprises Limited, uses different business names for most of its 100 product lines. That practice has helped turn Raffler into a $200 million a year mail order powerhouse with a trail of legal trouble decades long. Raffler specialized in low-cost items including watches, cheese, dolls, and rabbit ears. The company's names include... The Times story continued. Raffler had many brushes with the law. Attorney generals in Minnesota, Kansas, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Ohio have investigated, filed suit, or forced the company to halt various business practices in recent years. The Federal Trade Commission in 1986 issued a consent decree under which Raffler, without admitting guilt, paid a $150,000 penalty and agreed not to violate mail order rules, close quote. The article discussed a lawsuit filed by the New York Attorney General's office. Quote, Elizabeth Bradford, an assistant attorney general, said last summer in a complaint filed in the state Supreme Court, quote, having shown themselves incapable of making an honest sale or a consistently timely delivery, they should not be permitted to conduct any further mail order business in the state of New York, close quote. The complaint accuses Raffler of deceptive advertising, selling shoddy merchandise, misrepresenting merchandise, running illegal lotteries disguised as sweepstakes, and violating mail order rules for the timely shipment of goods, close quote.
Co-owner Jerry Williams responded to the suit. Quote, in court papers, Mr. Williams said the charges were, quote, unsupported by facts or evidence, close quote.
But 5 years later, Raffler had to pay the Attorney General's office a fine of $175,000. Board candidate Tibby Brooks of the Justice and Unity campaign explains.
A couple of years later, in January of 1992, UPI issued a release based on statements from State Attorney General Robert Abrams, then State Attorney Bob Abrams, about Steve Brown's mail order company agreeing to reform itself after being severely penalized. One of the country's leading mail order companies has agreed to reform its sales practices and speed up its refunds, according to Bob Abrams. Abrams said that more than 3,000 customers had complained to his office about Raffler Limited of Westbury, Long Island. He said the company, which does almost $200 million a year, big business, and mail order business, had misrepresented the quality of its merchandise and the value of sweepstakes prizes offered to induce sales. Many customers were kept waiting months for merchandise, he said. And you know, I think a lot of the mail order stuff that we're looking at where people are getting nothing for the money they send in reflects on Steve's attitude of contempt for the little man and woman.
Raffler, or DME, was at the top of the Metropolitan New York Better Business Bureau's list of most complained about company for 5 years in a row, reporting thousands of complaints. More information on Steve Brown's background can be found at the website called www.whoisstevebrown.info.
When this information was publicized to the WBAI community several years ago, Brown dismissed the lawsuit by widely respected Attorney General Bob Abrams, saying Abrams had a grudge against Brown, and he claimed that the Better Business Bureau had plotted to discredit him because they represent the retail industry. He wrote, quote, "What the Better Business Bureau never revealed to the newspapers or to the public is that although the number of these complaints seems large, it was actually only a tiny percentage of the total number of orders that my firm processed, or about 0.1%, far less than that of many retail firms." But the New York Times quoted Brown's own attorney, quote, "Neil J. Mordaunt, the company's lawyer and spokesman, said complaints are inevitable in the low-price mail-order business. He estimated that 96% of Raffler's orders are trouble-free. Based on 15 million shipments a year, that would mean 600,000 problems. He blames the post office for non-deliveries." Close quote. Obviously, 4% is quite different than 0.1%. The Times then casts doubt on the blame passed to the post office by quoting another mail-order businessman, writing, quote, "The industry has criticized the Postal Service for failing to deliver catalogs, but not parcels. It's one thing for the post office to throw away catalogs, but they don't throw away or steal packages," close quote, said David Hochberg, a spokesman for Lillian Vernon, a New York company that mailed 3.6 million packages in its last fiscal year, 200,000 of them by parcel post, close quote.
Brown claims he sued the Better Business Bureau and won, but Brown's rebuttal does not address the consent decree by the Federal Trade Commission, nor the probe by the Post Office, nor the investigations and lawsuits launched by Attorney Generals of Minnesota, Kansas, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Ohio.
Direct Marketing Enterprises had planned to become publicly traded, but bad publicity resulting from exposure of the bad business practices by the Federal Trade Commission, a government agency, and a probe by the U.S. Post Office seemed to scuttle that plan. A 1986 article in Crane's Business reported, quote, "Investors apparently won't get their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to buy stock in Direct Marketing Enterprises Limited, the Long Island mail-order company known for its low-priced, hyperbolically promoted merchandise. A planned $36 million initial public offering for the company, in the works since last year, has been postponed indefinitely, according to lawyers and underwriters involved in the deal. But it was forced to delay its offering to include in its preliminary prospectus additional information about a U.S. Postal Service probe of the company and certain financial data. An updated registration. Candidates from the Justice and Unity campaign maintain that Brown should know firsthand the discouraging impact of serious charges on the willingness of members of the public to invest in an organization such as WBAI, which relies on the support of its listeners. Again, Tibby Brooks.
And I think we have to realize that because Steve comes and says he's got a multi-billion-dollar business or whatever it is, and we don't know what we're doing, yes, we do. We want a station that reflects our values. We don't need somebody to come in and take us away. Let's keep BAI.